This film is about 3 transnational networks. 3 projects where people joined forces dealing with different aspects of coastal flooding and erosion. Their purpose is simple: to share ideas, messages, and ask you to think along. How to manage coastal erosion and flooding in a future that may be determined by the effects of climate change. For centuries, people along the shorelines and floodplains of the North Sea have lived and struggled with the sea. We have all responded to disastrous events in the past. Our shorelines look different everywhere. Coastal cliffs, dunes, mudflats, estuaries and polders claimed from the sea. They set the scenery for our use of the land behind. Coastal erosion and floods are natural phenomena and have happened since time immemorial. Our ways of managing the coast have improved much since then. In some places, gigantic projects were realized in estuaries that are protected by means of storm surge barriers. We all struggle with fine-tuning our own strategies to cope with an ever-changing shoreline. And we all organize it in our own way, within our local context, decided by national and regional laws, safety standards, the division of responsibilities, tasks, and funding. We have only just started to understand the peculiarities of our European neighbors. Over the years, people have become aware of climate change, boosted by carbon dioxide emissions. A grand effort will have to be made to cut back these emissions by sustainable forms of energy. However, especially in the North Sea region, more attention must also be given to the fact that we have to adapt to the effects of climate change. From science and monitoring, there are warnings of rising sea levels, forceful storms, and increased erosion. Also, our vulnerability to floods has increased due to ongoing human developments in flood-prone areas and close to the shoreline. This notion of increasing risks has led to a banding together of transnational professionals in coastal management. We have different viewpoints from different regions, contexts, and cultures to challenges in science, management, and policy. Now, how to have these different aspects work for us, rather than against us. The point is clear: how to keep this from happening in the future, and how to cope when it does. 3 transnational projects set out on a mission to learn from each other's approaches. Safe Coast studied the changing risk of flooding and erosion, and looked at general strategies to adapt to climate change. ComCoast came up with new ideas and showed practical solutions of how to reorganize stretches of our coastal zone. Chain of Safety has focused on what to do when all this is not enough, and how to cope during and after a flood event, even across our administrative borders. Let us take a look at some promising examples of coastal flood risk and erosion management. Transforming the concept of a coastal defense line into a coastal defense zone, functions such as housing, nature, and leisure can be combined with the safety function of a seawall or dike. Safety and nature conservation can go hand in hand. Salt marshes in front of the seawall offer protection and create a suitable environment for different forms of wildlife. Marshes may be newly created by realigning existing dikes, or reconstituted after too much erosion. There is a challenge in finding solutions. To preserve this old fortification, the dike in front of it is not heightened, but made resistant to wave overtopping. One of Comcoast's pilot projects is the renovation of Perkpolder in the Netherlands, an abandoned ferry port on the western Scheldt estuary. Several public and private parties have developed a plan for new use of the location. Comcoast has contributed to this plan by developing innovative flood protection methods. Buildings will be located on a mound that is expected to have sufficient elevation to ensure safety from a rising sea level for the next 200 years. In front of a new sea dike, a salt marsh will develop and act as a buffer. The old dike will form a breakwater for the new flood protection zone. The dike of another flood protection zone will be modified in such a way that it will withstand waves washing over the top, without compromising its safety. The newly developing natural landscape will flourish under the influence of a saltwater environment. Supplying sand on a regular basis is a successful and much used so-called soft technique to consolidate the existing coastline. Sand nourishments are a way of working with nature rather than against it. No-regret measures require a solid understanding of the behavior of sand and water, which requires ongoing monitoring and research. In many places, we must rely on hard structures to defend ourselves from the sea. Understanding how a dike breaches remains a challenge that we have to respond to with a long breath. In some risky places, it is worthwhile to take flood risks into account in planning and design, sometimes reserving space behind the coastal flood defences. Sometimes safeguarding land from development that is required for current and future flood management, e.g. conveyance and storage of floodwater. Sometimes making buildings resistant to extreme events. All in all, it is important that we learn to live with water and nature again. Even though risks can be minimized, catastrophes may still happen, and in places with a large flood risk, one should be prepared. Sandbags may still form a much-used remedy to reinforce threatened dikes, but there is more to dealing with accidents and disasters. Crisis management is about coping with accidents and disasters based on contingency plans for the relevant administrative levels. Storm surge warning services need to be operational and extensive. Worst possible flood scenarios must be ready and known by those responsible. Practicing crisis situations is an important part of the preparations. Exchange of experience and mutual assistance between North Sea regions in the event of coastal flooding is essential. Therefore, in Zeeland, a knowledge centre on coastal flooding will be developed as part of the Water Academy. Finally, it is obvious that people are informed and can inform themselves adequately.
Danmark har ca. 7.300 km kystlinje. Hvis vi som et tankeeksperiment strakte denne kystlinje ud, ville vi have en kyst, der nåede et pænt stykke ind i Mongoliet.
Many different risk communication and awareness-raising efforts exist in the North Sea region countries.
After they carried out the Sigma and Delta plans, Belgium and Holland seemed...
These efforts range from giving very specific self-help guidance and risk maps via the internet to awareness campaigns on radio and television.
The water boards are different.
It is important to make risks known in order to improve individual resistance to flood events and gain support for appropriate measures. So do we wait for the bus or climate change? Let's improve ourselves with each other's help and knowledge.